Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome back to another episode of the Zhuge Liang Northern Expedition lore series as we continue with episode 11, titled Food Fight. Now, in our last episode, we discussed Cao Zhen's failed offensive against the kingdom of Shuhan, as a month-long rain made the already treacherous Ziwu path totally intraversable. And with Cao Zhen's main attack force attritioning away to the elements, and unable to arrive in time, the Wei court decided to call off this ambitious three-fronted assault on Hanzhong, as a disjointed attack against a prepared defense led by Zhuge Liang would be an unnecessary risk for Wei. And while the weather in fall of 230 would prove unusually wet, in the 6 months that followed, the Yong province became unseasonably dry, as Zhuge Liang would take this opportunity to launch his 4th northern expedition, as he would once again return to the Mount Qi path to target the Yong province. But unlike his first campaign, Zhuge Liang would have many new advantages for this campaign, starting with the newly acquired Wudu commandery, which sat on the Mount Qi path itself. This meant Zhuge Liang could start this campaign much closer to his first key target at Mount Qi Castle, and that his supply line would be much shorter. This is also aided by a brand new invention by Zhuge Liang in the wooden cattle, or mu niu, which was described to be a modified wheelbarrow capable of traveling roughly 15 kilometers a day while holding 200 kilograms of grain each. Sadly, no physical copies of this invention would survive the test of time, as we only have written documentations as proof of its existence. However, it is worth noting that while mu niu was completely historical as a supply transport tool, they were not capable of autonomous driving as they're often depicted in Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So, with a shorter supply line and ample supplies, Zhuge Liang decided to take a much more time-consuming approach with this campaign, as instead of just isolating Mount Qi Castle with a small force and moving on with the main army, Zhuge Liang decided to build a brand new city northeast of Mount Qi Castle, which he would name Lucheng, to function as a command post for the Shuhan forces, while Wang Ping would be sent to siege Mount Qi Castle in order to trigger a response from the Wei forces. Much like in the previous northern expeditions, Zhuge Liang desperately wanted to lure the Wei army out for a decisive showdown, as any prolonged war of attrition would put the smaller kingdom of Shuhan at a greater disadvantage. Another interesting difference between this northern expedition and all the ones prior is that the Wei command would fall on Sima Yi this time, as Grand General Cao Zhen was still sick from the illness he caught while trapped in the Ziwu path. Of course, Cao Zhen would never recover from this illness, as he would die in Luoyang before the conclusion of this northern expedition. So, with a new commander out west, the Wei forces would have to contend with the clashes in personality and differences in military philosophy, as the main 4 Wei officers on the ground out west in Guo Huai, Zhang He, Fei Yao, and Dai Ling all shared no prior experience working with Sima Yi, who was also unfamiliar with the Western Front itself. And these clashes would start early, as right after Sima Yi would arrive in Chang'an, he would order Dai Ling to leave behind only 4,000 defenders at Shangbang, while the remaining Yong province troops were ordered to reinforce Mount Qi Castle under the command of Guo Huai and Fei Yao. At the same time, he would personally march the entire Wei reserves from Chang'an through the low mountain ranges to reinforce them as soon as possible. While there was nothing wrong inherently with this deployment and tactical approach, it did go against the wishes of the local generals. Guo Huai, for example, had witnessed the battle prowess of the Shuhan infantry firsthand in the previous 3 northern expeditions, and had enough of Zhuge Liang's tactics to know charging headfirst at the Shuhan army is generally a bad idea, which is why during the 3rd northern expedition, Guo Huai's approach was to retreat and give up these two border commanderies of Wudu and Yinping instead of trying to rescue them through an open field battle against Zhuge Liang. In addition, General Zhang He also argued against Sima Yi's plan to march all of the Wei reserve forces west for a showdown against Zhuge Liang, as this was an unnecessary risk. It is far better, in Zhang He's opinion, to spread the reserve forces out amongst the possible path to Chang'an, as Zhuge Liang's show of force out west might just be one of many attacks planned for this northern expedition, as all the previous northern expeditions had multiple points of attack. However, Sima Yi, who had always prided himself on his quick and decisive military style, felt confident that Zhuge Liang's forces would be no match against the full might of the Wei army and his tactics. And even if there was another diversionary attack from elsewhere, Sima Yi felt that as long as he could quickly crush Zhuge Liang's main force, then secondary threats would be of no concern. But Sima Yi's plans would soon start unraveling as Guo Huai and Fei Yao's rescue force were decimated in first contact with Zhuge Liang's main forces. The defeat itself was so bad that the Book of Jin, or the official court history of the Jin dynasty, decided to skip writing about this battle entirely, as it would have damaged Sima Yi's reputation against his famed rival Zhuge Liang. But historically, Zhuge Liang was not only able to halt Wei's attempt at relieving Mount Qi Castle's siege, but the casualties were so high for the Wei side that even after retreating back to Shangbang, where they had 4,000 troops in reserve, they were still helpless in stopping the victorious pursuing Shu Han army from harvesting the grains in the fields surrounding Shangbang. Now, previously we discussed the importance of Shangbang during the first northern expedition, as this would be the stronghold that Guo Huai held onto to stop Zhuge Liang's advances. And the reason why Guo Huai chose here to defend is because it's one of the few fertile valleys in the mountainous Qinling mountain range that could offer substantial farmland to help support armies in the west. So despite the scant historical records surrounding this initial engagement, the fact that Zhuge Liang was able to harvest Shangbang's grains right under the nose of the Wei garrison proves that the Wei side took heavy losses in this initial fight. And we're also certain that Zhuge Liang was able to harvest most of the crops from Shangbang, as when Sima Yi's main forces finally arrived at Shangbang and forced Zhuge Liang to pull back towards their newly built stronghold in Lucheng, northeast of Mount Qi Castle, the supply situation for the Wei army immediately became desperate, to the point that Guo Huai had to forcefully take 5 years' worth of food reserves from the local town tribes in the region just to help feed Sima Yi's army, as Shangbang was originally supposed to provide the stopgap food needed to keep the Wei main forces fed before future supplies from Chang'an could arrive. Not only did this situation put Wei on the back foot, it also damaged their relationship with the Qiang tribes, which would eventually contribute to the Qiang's support of Shu Han in the future. And speaking of nomadic relations, Zhuge Liang also linked up with the ambitious Xianbei chieftain Ke Bineng to posture on the Wei northeastern front to tie up Wei forces and supplies in order to limit the amount that can be thrown into the western front. Ultimately, Zhuge Liang was able to leverage a decisive open field win over Wei's western garrison to not only gain additional food supplies for the Fourth Northern Expedition, but also take away vital food supplies from the Wei army, as the unnatural weather in the year prior out west, with 1 month of heavy rain followed by a 6-month-long drought, have already emptied much of the food reserves in the west, especially following Cao Zhen's ambitious, fruitless, and expensive campaign against Hanzhong. And with that, we'll also be ending our episode here, as the 4th Northern Expedition kicks off heavily in Shu Han's favor, but with Sima Yi and the main Wei forces now arriving, the long-awaited showdown between Zhuge Liang and Sima Yi is officially about to kick off. So hopefully you all enjoyed this episode enough to hit that like button to help support the channel, and I will see you all next time. Bye!